Hi. So I woke up this morning, or afternoon, slept late, and lo and behold, I see some people, I'm not going to name names, but particularly obscure, Tim Pool, who has been kind of drumming this, belief that an evolution is inevitable, which he calls civil war. And look, I've seen this before. This is typical of those who see themselves as sort of this, messianic figure leading a movement that they deem themselves to be superior as well as more brilliant or capable than anybody else at not only diagnosing but also being on the right side of it. I see him behaving in such a way that's reminiscent of stuff that I saw coming from Mean Girls in high school and middle school, and it's really pissing me off. Why is it really pissing me off? For one thing, I've been talking about this stuff now since prior to COVID, but a little background for you all. My mother is Hungarian. My grandfather was Viennese, and we're Jews, and my grandfather was nobility, and they fled Hungary in 1944. They fled particularly from a group that was known as the Arrow Cross, or also known as Green Shirts. These were the worst of the worst, okay? People generally don't have any knowledge about them, but if I'm going to summarize them for you, take every single quality of what we've seen in the progressive or socialist or woke right, which I have already expressed why I think this is a dangerous term to use right now because it simply reinforces the dialectic, but I'm going to use it now because it's what we have. My goal here is to explain to you not only why this is so dangerous, but also how narrative is utilized, kind of like a dark spell. And I want to do so by launching shortly a live stream on YouTube where I'm going to be reading portions of Power of the Powerless by Václav Havel. I'm just going to mention here that about 2 years ago, I think it was, I was urging people who were in the Karlin Borisenko camp, who I think we pretty much already know that, she's got about the same kind of motives as many of other people who are now have risen into, positions of influence around media for whatever reason. I mean, it's really only because of how much attention we're giving them, but it's understandable because in a absence of substance, people will flock to whatever is there, kind of like a mirage in a desert. I think people need to understand how this began. So my background is in the arts. I went to Tisch School of the Arts. I left New York, fled New York during the COVID stuff, and I've always loved the arts, but I was never able to reconcile sort of the hypocrisy that I was seeing out of SAG and AFTRA and all of that. And this is just my personal issue. And I used to think that I was an idiot because I wouldn't, pursue my dream until I realized really that performing was not my dream. But I was motivated by something else. Now, here's the problem. The purges that began in the arts, media, news, journalism, you name it, have a unbelievable sort of symmetry to what was going on in the 1930s, particularly once Folk realism was determined to be the only form of art or philosophy, really, or way of explaining anything going on, and that anyone else who was attempting to write, critique literature, teach, you name it, across the board, was purged or killed. In my Dancing Nurses thread, I touched on the artist Meyerhold and what happened to him when he was accused of what they called formalism. One thing we need to understand, Mao was a poet. His wife was a dancer. We already know that, Hitler was a painter. We also don't seem to understand that the very people who helped to undo this dark art or artifice or as some described it in the limited amounts of art history that we have regarding social realism, because it is not in the best interest of those who obtain power to discuss it, because it's what bore them aloft. Okay, so let's look for a second and understand one of the qualities that we can see throughout the utilization of this philosophy is the ever-rising, amplification and rise of mediocrity into positions of power and how they sustain it. It is a quality that always comes with this sort of mass culture. Understand that mass culture is not the same thing as populist. It is not the same thing as a free market. It is not the same thing as people utilizing the positive aspects of crowd sourcing or funding or determination by each individual choosing what they will consume or participate in. We have to recall what happened in 2020. In 2020, that notion that we were even able to access such a thing was obliterated. Okay? Theaters were shut down. All options that allowed people to, communicate and come together and share experiences intimately and between one another was cut off. Basically, one could say we were all basically thrust into what can very safely and very reasonably be called a gulag. But that gulag was, placed around each of us, and we seemed to choose it willingly. And there was even, dictate that said that this was an act of love, or this was compassionate, or this was for the greater good. That mythology is no different than any other mythology that was used to exacerbate the same kind of false consciousness or a seizing of the means of production, which is you and I. We are the means. This is a key thing to understand. What we see now happening across the board, doesn't matter whether it's politically left, right, up, down, whatever. The thing that we keep seeing now, and it's getting worse and worse, is an absolute lack of respect for, in fact, even a belittling of individuality and the concept of individuation and how it plays a role in liberty. We see people redefining individualism by the very terms that were created by people like Mao. Now, the CCP has reinstated the philosophy of Mao. They've actually even said this since their 100th year anniversary. Now, I'm going to say this plainly. If we already know that the CCP was very much involved in every single step of the COVID narrative, and it wasn't only a cronyism between the public and the private sectors, but also an imposition of a foreign government upon the decisions that were being made there. Very concerted effort, very well thought out, and very much a fifth generation warfare approach. And we even see it in narratives that are for entertainment purposes. All of this is intertwined together. But the way that they are all belittling and essentially adjudicating the concept of individualism is terrifying. Gorky, who stated himself in the development of a uniquely Soviet, socialist, Maoist, whatever you want to call it, art form, and in this deconstruction of separating art from science and philosophy, we suddenly think that art is just merely an aesthetic. It is not. We knew this not too long ago. We just forgot it, okay? And he says, Gorky himself said that individuality was bankrupt, decrepit, zoological. We're seeing this happening across the board on certain quote-unquote right influencers. But we also, let me remind you what in fact happened in the last couple years. Just a little maybe team reality history lesson for everybody, because maybe people didn't know this. But when people, and the fact that it was even called team reality is actually quite poetically beautiful, because it shows something about the nature of authentic and organic movements. So with much respect, hesitating respect at this moment actually to Breitbart, no, politics is not up or downstream from culture. That is an absolute fabrication of reality. Why? Because it only serves politics to say this, or it only serves journalists to say this. It's not reality. Culture is the stream. Politics are embankments, okay? And to place politics or polemics as being as human and natural and part of our universe and in keeping with the order and of the universe and natural law, all we see happen is this illusion being placed upon reality. That is Sok reality. It is not true. We knew it wasn't true, and it was so glaringly obvious when the ideology of queer theory, which is also Sok realism, okay, all right, imposed itself upon not only, basically, and kind of concocted this LGBTQ, blah, 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 and destroyed the sanctity of the individual within every group there. It turned people into props and utility just basically for a political and ideological aim. It's a cult. It's a religious cult, but it doesn't live only on one side of the political arena, because it needs the opposition of the other side of the political arena to basically move the revolutionary spiral, and it does so through the Great Narrative. The Great Reset. So we have Great Leap Forward, Great Reset, Great Narrative. So what's the Great Narrative? The Great Narrative's plot structure is very, very simple. It needs to create a new hero, but that new hero is not based on its good or bad deeds being rooted in an amalgamated wisdom. It eradicates it, completely undoes it. That's why it's known as the New Man Paradox. We saw this with Hitler. We see this with Stalin. We see this with Mao. These totalitarian creeps, as they creep along in society, and they've been there for a very long time. They've always been there. What they will do is they continue to take advantage of what is seemingly a organic or natural cycle of societies that have these ebbs and flows, and we keep having these systems imposed and placed upon reality and told, oh, this is real. This is how reality works. And the way we stop it is only through more participation in politics. We were warned about this upon our founding in George Washington's farewell address. What made America so unique in all the world is an understanding that principle was worth preserving. That the American dream is not what corporate actors tell you it is, the picket fence, 2.5 cars. No, it's the act of dreaming. People don't seem to understand what a blessing of liberty that is. Now, my grandfather was able to get his family away from Hungary in 1944. But after that, Securitate came, which was Romania's secret police, arrested him, and he spent a decade in 2 gulags and a horrific experiment toward the end there, which I don't want to get into now because it makes me too upset. But let me say this. Menticide is far more common and far more dangerous than genocide. Menticide means the rape of the mind. Are you going to tell me that it's not pretty darn clear that narrative has not been used to do that to all of us, especially since 2020? Of course it has. We all know it. So the good news is that all of this stuff is built on an illusion. And the better news is that Václav Havel, who was a playwright, I might add, instead of trying to just use the term Sok realism, which clearly doesn't, it's difficult for many people to grasp. I think it has to do with the beauty of the natural diversity in how we think. And that is part of the beauty also of a liberalism of thought and a liberalism of ideas, which are the founding principles of our country. But a false definition of this has been imposed upon all of us for so long, and I have been yelling and screaming about this, and we do not have yet a word that can replace it, because we also don't have a word that can replace liberty, nor should we need to. But in the interim, until we can actually remove the assault that's being done on our core principles, I'm going to try to share with you what Václav Havel, a playwright, how he explained this. It's going to take a little bit of time, and I'm going to be reading it to you. Maybe jumping around a little bit, because what we have to understand is that this is not a normal, well understood immediately problem. There's a mythology that says that, like, when a leader of, say, one of the Soviet leaders fell, whether it was Ceausescu or Gorbachev giving up, that somehow this was created and manufactured and done only by the use of politics, economics, etc. This is not what happened. It's not. And this is the good news and bad news. Because the reason this is important is that the power of the powerless, including you and I, is so extraordinary. And Václav not only was able to capture this and explain it, but it is what led to the Prague Spring and later the Velvet Revolution. I hate the term revolution, but really the moment that the totalitarian substructure was shown to be so founded and rooted in lies that it disintegrates. The only reason that it didn't fully disintegrate, and this is, I can't prove this, but I'm pretty darn confident in saying it, is that the best way to look at what actually happened is that we did not really win the Cold War. Why? Because we weren't allowed to. Mao beat Stalin, and there were absolutely have been Maoists in our own government. And this is not a nationality thing. This is actually something much, much, much more important to understand. It is a united front of people who wish to spread communism globally throughout the world. The use of scapegoats such as Jews, anti-vaxxers, what's the word I'm looking for? Starts with a D. Hitler called degenerates. A manufacturing of dissidents, a manufacturing of deviance, only serves to make it more difficult for so-called dissidents to actually successfully not only accomplish a more hidden defense of a culture and a society, but also to force them out of the very society that they love so much and want to defend. This is a typical tactic. So whether you agree or disagree with, say, somebody like James Lindsay, you have to understand that what you're being pushed towards is a dehumanization. Because look, no one is ever going to have to pass a perfect purity test. But what is lost in the Marxist and later Leninist and Stalinist and Hitlerian and Maoist philosophy from what has made our country so profoundly remarkable is an understanding of basic core principles, sense of honor, values, and then we end up educating a mass generation in something that creates not only people like the Hitler Youth or the Red Guard or the Young Pioneers, but a perception that is what is innately and inevitably human, that we are all simply animals, that we are all simply either useful or useless eaters, without any restraint and without any ability to look beyond ourselves and dream of something and then innovate towards it. That is what is being done. So as we are watching as the very landscape that allowed Team Reality to prosper, we are seeing incredibly bad actors whom are mediocre. I don't care who's funding them and who's supporting them. I am pretty darn sure that the one actual thing that we are not allowed to talk about, people keep saying this about Israel and about Jews. No, let's stop being stupid here. And if there's any, cooperation that has happened in the past or in the future or currently from that, it doesn't define a people overall. Just as what I'm about to say does not define the people who happen to be Chinese or happen to be Pakistani or happen to be segments of India or happen to be segments of Ukraine or happen to be segments of Russia. That is a complete and utter fabrication of what is reality. The totalitarian creeps will take on a look, doesn't matter what it is, their goal is all the same, always. And totalitarianism is not a dictatorship. It is not a even fully really an oligarchy, but it is manufactured, as Lenin explained, from above, seemingly part of something coming from below, but it is an utter rejection of not only natural law, but the actual order of the universe. The reason artists were so good at explaining this is that art, when it is at its best and not simply artifice, and this is a challenge for every artist, And I don't only mean in the fine arts. I mean the art of medicine, the art of politics, the art of elocution, the art of architecture, all of it. I mean, there's an art to life. There is. And there's a huge now segment of the population who do not understand this, who aren't even able to recognize art, let alone seek it or yearn for it. And this is not shocking, because if we think about it, how long has it been since the majority of the planet would even have access to such a thing? We don't think about this. So we're going through what could be very basically looked at as growing pains, sort of the adolescence, particularly of America, where we are starting to understand, what does independence really, really mean? What does liberty really, really mean? What is freedom really? Is freedom the ability to do anything you wish to do? No. Freedom and liberty require an element of restraint. Now, as women, I'm going to say this to us first of all. Liberation theology targeted us first. We have a responsibility now. Just as I said, artists have had a responsibility. Ladies, we're not doing our job. And what is that job? It is finding a way of communicating something in a way that, yes, oftentimes requires a pleasantness. That doesn't mean submission, nor does that mean meekness. We've been told for so long that women were not part of the fabric of this country, that they were not part of the creation of our Constitution, they were not part of the Declaration, they were not part of, any of it. That is a load of absolute bunk. It's bullshit. Here's one way that I can prove that to you. My grandmother in Hungary was a lawyer. Her mother was a lawyer. There was no glass ceiling that ended that. In fact, my grandfather, who was nobility, was married to a princess, divorced the princess in order to marry my grandmother. My great-grandmother thought, nope, I don't want that. He's a snob. So let me say, this illusion of some patriarchy marching over us and taking things over. No. That's just a false creation of that same dialectic, that same Hegelian dialectic that's being imposed, claiming that woke is the domain of right or left. Neither. Woke, awakening to a false consciousness, awakening to this belief that the only way in which we can fully liberate ourselves from a false, captive state is, well, we put it this way. There was no glass ceiling for my family until Stalin. Also, Lenin was shot by a woman. I'm not encouraging violence here. I'm just mentioning we cannot sit by and watch our sons and daughters and watch our men and watch our world just collapse, thinking there's nothing we can do. That is utter hogwash. And I'll give you one little piece of background about Hungarians. Here's a funny thing. Yes, in Hungary, the green shirts and the Arrow Cross rose, and there's a dark element there that is very much part of the Hungarian psyche. However, they were a gross minority that were not, absolutely not welcome in power. The only reason they got power, even though they're often considered to have been created by Hitler, was what Stalin was able to do once he got to Hungary and got some entrenchment there. It happened because of that alliance. That is a red-green alliance. It's not purely based on some notion of communists with Islamists. No. The red-green alliance, in essence, is the ability for this intellectual, or mediocre, really is what they are, revolting elite class to combine and couple with a violent, I'm just going to say it this way, underclass that has no options, no future, no potential, and they are angry and feel entitled. Sound familiar? Antifa is far closer to them than anything else. So we've got to stop falling for this party and partisan bullshit, because that is not who we are. And if we continue to do that, we're just going to fuel the smoke. And look, I don't have children. I'm the last. I'm an only child. So it's not my life that I'm really all that concerned about. Here's what I'm concerned about. I'm only here because my grandfather's not. And the reason he's not here is because when he was released, briefly, he was told he could stay out of prison, out of the gulag, if he never spoke to his, or saw his daughter, son, or wife again. considering everything he went through and the fact that he said no, knowing what that would mean, showing that level of honor. If I'm only here because he's not, as mad as it may seem, I have to keep trying to remind everybody what honor is, what land of the free and home of the brave means. So stop this catty, mean girl bullshit. And ladies, we have to stand for something here, because what we're watching is 100% created by small minds. Remember what Emerson said, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, adored by statesmen, philosophers, and divines. Trust thyself. Self-reliance was once a quintessential piece of work about America because it talked about what individualism really was. It's not anymore. Now it's being redefined as greed or entitlement or a lack of restraint or liberty. That is utter hogwash. Now it's not going to suddenly become part of the overall zeitgeist the way it once say it was, or felt like it was in the late 80s and 90s. But we need to stop mourning what was and realizing that none of this is inevitable. This march of revolution is not inevitable. All it's going to take, as much like it did during COVID, and I will hope much faster, is you say one simple word: no. No. Refuse to buy into this and refuse to allow foreign actors, and there's a lot of them, to spread this. Here's one little side note for you. One of the main players in this whole disgusting ordeal is a man named Stu Peters. You can go and look back on my timeline. One of the most disgusting things I saw that man do, and this was horrifically disgusting, and this should appall everybody. He was sharing a video of women somewhere in Asia. Now we know it was actually Vietnam, but he was making it appear as if this was some wet market. And this is way before he started to really show his true colors. And also recall that he was someone who Dr. Vladimir Zelenko had trusted. And may his memory be a blessing, because he saved many, 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 many lives. And much like every other member of the mediocre, revolting elite, Stu is just overcome with jealousy and a self-knowledge of just how not only arrogant, but insecure he really is, and mediocre by comparison. That once upon a time, reality TV bounty hunter could not hold a candle to the art of medicine that was. Remember what Vladimir had said. Many of us have him to thank for our lives and the lives of our loved ones today. He was a voice that was kind, pleasant, hopeful, that came across this disgusting misuse of media. And guess what Stu did after he died? Not too long after. He showed this video of these women at a supposed wet market, and it appeared as if they were selling, literally, baby parts for food. I watched as so many people were so appalled and looking and saying, how can human beings be like this? Well, here's the thing. They're not. He lied. He did what is known as blood libel. Blood libel isn't only done to Jews, my friends. Blood libel is what's used and was used in places like Patesh to create a belief that a human being is capable of the kind of sick, demented ideas that men like Stu Peters have no problem spreading in order to simply entrench their own power. Because, poor dears, what else would they do? And so what did he do? He shared that. I watched as dozens upon dozens upon dozens of people reacted saying, oh my gosh, how can anybody be that way? Now, why would he do that? Well, this is what people do in order to instigate and create a global sense of hopelessness and a need for revolution, because at the end of the day, these people, man, people who keep drumming up revolution I have zero respect for them. People like Tim Pool as well, who keep talking about civil war being inevitable. No respect for them. Why? Because I know what that is. All revolutions destroy culture. All revolutions destroy libraries of Alexandria. They are using you and your children, and also people around the world, just to arrogantly support their own world. And when I shared what that video actually was, it took me days and days and days to get a community note written. So let me tell you what it actually was. This is how sick these people are. This is how sick they are. What it actually was a video that was created by a pro-life group in the United Kingdom to show the kindness of some women in Vietnam who, after forcible abortion or early birth that led to miscarriage, when there was a shame or an inability of the parents to actually tend to and wash the bodies of these children for burial, to give them the right that maintains a sense of sacredness of life. I don't care what your position on abortion is. This matters. A respect for the sacred matters, especially after COVID. How many people died alone? So this man who supposedly died suddenly with the best of intentions, who was trying to show you that he's your friend. What a freaking snake. He showed this, and what it actually is are brave women washing these little babies. And these were women who cannot have children, or don't. I can relate to that. I can relate to women who would put aside their grief and a recognition that no, we cannot do it all or get what we want. And no, by following the science isn't going to get you there. They put aside all of that and did that. And what did he do? Turned them into cannibals. That's who we're dealing with here. This is not something that is done via policy. And certainly we're never going to be able to really reach the people who are funding these assholes. Or maybe we'll one day find out that it is them. Who knows? I don't care. I want it stopped. Otherwise, it's basically like saying when rape is inevitable, lay back and enjoy it. Bullshit. Absolute bullshit. So, what future do you want? Do you want a future where we end up with a worse, quote-unquote, mainstream? One that couldn't even reach anywhere if it hadn't been for the purges that were also used by a Me Too movement that, as many of us know, ladies, was utter bullshit too. So here we are. What are we going to do? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read to you all the thoughts of Václav Havel shortly from my YouTube channel. I would rather do it in a Zoom. So if people want that at some point, or even right now, I'll take a few minutes, shoot me a DM, and if there's even, 3 of you, let's do it that way, so we can talk about it. Because I'm sick and tired of making this a monologue. I want to hear what you have to say. I want to hear your thoughts, and I want some solutions. And I'll say this much. We don't need to accept socialism, because it's not true. Just like in postmodern theory is socialism. So let's name the actual period that we're in this era of, and as Douglas Murray wisely called, Reconstruction. I suggest romantic surrealism. Why? Because it's in the clash of faith and absurdity. And a faith that's unable to be required by one's own means is just a leap that we see truth, especially in situations like this. Want some proof? Think about how romantically surreal those women were. And that is what we can be doing here, rather than basically sitting in a lunchroom watching as a bunch of queen bee mean girls duke it out for position at, head of the table. Well, some bastards behind them prepare to completely... Because look, the truth of the matter is genocide is generally used as a form of menticide. That's the purpose of it. If you're dead, you're dead. There's worse things than being dead. The opposite of life isn't death, it's a machine. So I don't want to give in to that. And that bastard basically made it appear that those women are cannibalistic machines, and then turned you, after suffering so much through the horrors of what was going on with COVID, after being treated like a number, after being told you're inessential, after watching dancing nurses try to fill you with not only fear, but a spooky belief that you are not welcome unless you submit and do something to your body you don't want to do. What does this fucking sound like? Yeah. So enough. So I'll be with y'all shortly. Check out the link. Start reading ahead. We're going to get to work trying to understand what the power of the powerless is, how truth works, and each of us, only thing we have to do is live not by lies. Each of us, every single day. The rest of it, an illusion. Because that stream is there no matter what. Culture is a stream. It's not going anywhere. All we have to do is remember. And then, may the memory of people like Vladimir Zelenko be a blessing. And may names like Stu Peters be forgotten. And several others. But wannabe Goebbels. It's pathetic. So let's beat this. And when we do, let's aim for something very... Why not? Once we do, like I said once, remember what it feels to be free. Remember truth. Remember how to live not by lies. And remember that when we win this time, they will never be able to do this again. The alternative is unthinkable. So let's make it unthinkable.